My daughter is a doctor in San Diego. She's an infectious diseases specialist. I have a son who is in New York, and I'm told that face masks are not available in New York. I'm not talking of my daughter in San Diego. So, I mean, things are difficult.
Yeah. And now China is exporting those face masks.
Well, they are, but there are enough reports from different capitals that a lot of stuff is substandard. The test kits are defective. Even in the time of adversity, we see this is happening, and that is most unfortunate. But that is the kind of power that we are dealing with.
Yeah, it's a very sad situation, and we need to contain it, and we all have to get together. Ultimately, we need China's help also, and yet, I mean, I think it's gonna take a while. And so another question: global markets are in free fall, while the Chinese stock market is still holding firm. The whole world is viewing the virus as a huge challenge, but is China seeing an opportunity here? Are they investing heavily around the world, and now that share prices are hitting all-time lows?
Fair question. There is a lot of speculation around or reports along those lines. Again, I would urge caution, because there is a lot of misinformation floating around. I have been studying the Chinese markets and the other markets, and from a low of on the, let's say, the 31st of December, when they went public, to now, there has been a minus 5% fluctuation. So I do not see, I mean, the figures speak for themselves, right? So if you look at the Shanghai Composite Index or the Hong Kong Index, no, I don't think that the stock market's better. And nor is there industrial production at the moment, at least up till now, doing better. In fact, if you look at the numbers, quarter one and quarter two, there has been a 10% loss at least. And since the Cultural Revolution, which ended in 1776, China has never had its GDP growth rate fall by 10%. So they are also having an issue, but what they have managed to do is to restructure their manufacturing facilities very quickly from one product to another product, and start producing face masks and testing kits.
Which is the need of the hour.
Yes, which is the need of the hour. That's correct.
So I'm going to give the session a break and invite questions from our members of WorldSpa. Anybody has any questions? Anybody wants to discuss anything? Mr. Vishnu Prakash is open to all questions and all discussions. Anybody has an opinion? Please, you're most welcome.
Archana, hi, this is Kanchan.
Hi, Kanchan.
Hi. I
You're
had a
sitting
question.
in London.
Yeah. So
Please.
Thank you very much for organizing this. This is really useful.
You're most welcome, Kanchan. Please shoot.
We are all, talking about and reading about one of the biggest risks right now from India, which is, not just the fact that we get into a full-blown outbreak, but the overall migrant worker crisis that, if it sort of hits those kind of levels, it will be uncontrolled. So what is the sort of opinion in terms of, the likelihood of something like that happening? What is it that the government can do to control that? And, what's going to be the impact of that? I know it's hard to quantify, but it would be great to hear some thoughts on that.
Well, all I can say is that, can I go ahead, Archana?
Yeah, Vishnuji, please.
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. All I can say is that in my memory as an adult, as a senior government official, I have never seen such proactivity by Government of India. And they are doing everything that it takes, almost everything. Now, for example, there has been this question about widespread testing. And the good news is that at least 4 Indian companies, could be more by now, have been authorized to start producing test kits. And the numbers that they can manage are quite substantial. The cost at which they can produce kits is at least one fourth of the cost of the imported kits. So I don't have any inside information. I do not want to, but going by media reports, government is perhaps starting to look at more widespread testing. So, but I must commend our friends in WorldSpa for being so disciplined and the BOM for being so proactive. The responsibility is also on the citizen, because unless each and every citizen cooperates, now, this crisis cannot be contained. So I really hope that the leadership has been provided, but all of us do, in our small ways, also play its ball, because it's in our own interest.
This is Vipin Kapoor. May I ask a question, sir?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's in sort of two questions. You can answer them in any order you like. One is the Markaz in Nizamuddin. Where does the responsibility lie? And the other one is these migrant workers from UP and Bihar. Could that be avoided? And is it also the contractors who have not been responsible and only blaming the government?
The first part of the question, sir, with your permission or your understanding, I would not like to get into because it is politically very sensitive. I will avoid that. On the issue of the migrants, all I can say is that certainly it's a big challenge. Already the challenge is being contained, has been contained. Government has stepped in. As an administrator, I can say that you cannot anticipate, even with the best of intentions, each and every eventuality. Now, the idea was that everybody will maintain status quo, will stay put. But that hordes of migrant workers, and I'm not blaming anybody, they just leave for their hometowns and leave in the kind of numbers that they'd left. I guess this was something that nobody could have anticipated. At least I did not anticipate that. But having said that, the government has stepped in, facilities are being set up. I don't hold any brief for anybody. All I know is that nobody can be perfect under the circumstances. Nobody can be perfect. With hindsight, you can say, or we can say, oh, this could have been done or that could have been done. I mean, that's hindsight vision is 2020. But other than that, I believe that whatever can be done under the circumstances is being done.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Goel.
Good afternoon.
Yeah. Sir, as you said that the conspiracy theory could be possible looking at the past history.
I did not say possible. No. I did not say the conspiracy theories could be possible. So please do not attribute something to me which I have not said. I said I will avoid I know what I said, sir, that I will not get to conspiracy theories. And I said we need to get to the bottom of it. There are enough pointers that have been cases like that earlier.
Sir, I understand you being a very senior bureaucrat, you will never say directly, but we can always understand that.
Well, sir, the deduction is yours. I know what I've said. And
I know you said pointers.
The way you want.
You said that there are pointers. My question was, presumably this comes out true, what would be the India's response towards China policy?
I will not get into conspiracy theories.
No, I'm not saying, sir. Presumably, it is true. What will be India's response towards China?
Theories. I will not get into conspiracy theories. Presumably, it is true is conspiracy theory. I will not get into that.
I have a question.
Will there be change in China's policy after this event? India's policy towards China.
Well, the world has always hoped, and the entire engagement. If you recall, China and the US normalized in 1972, I think, if I remember right. Nixon has visited China and met Mao. That's when the West started engaging China, and the hope was that the more the Western world, more the international community engages China, more China will open up. I mean, that was the whole premise of the engagement. But what we have seen is just the mirror opposite. And the engagement has meant that China has become a very rich country. But they have enhanced restrictions. Their ambition has grown. Their aggressiveness has grown. So the world earnestly hopes that China becomes a country or a member of the Committee of Nations which knows how to work with the other countries. We also hope so because we have a 4,000 kilometer long border with China and we have been trying to engage China. Question is, as I've served in China, I've been watching China for 25 years. Do I expect China to change? I'm afraid no. What can we do about it? I think we are in for a long haul.
Ranjanji.
I have a question for you in terms of the timing of sort of the world coming back and not trying to engage China in a dialogue. I think you made a very interesting point that the UN Security Council, they're doing everything they can to block the discussion, of anything arising. And we know that they're always there for a long haul. So the leader in such a discussion would have to be the United States. And we know that things are just getting worse in the US. And right now, they're totally engaged in their own problems and, 20,000 cases per day and so on and so forth. So where does that leave us? I mean, is there an opportunity now, or do we have to sort of bide our time and work bilaterally with major, the BRIC countries or Europe or whatever to come up with a platform which the US will lead or another bloc leads or whatever? Because I think if you go at the Chinese one by one, they'll decimate you. I mean, they need to be confronted by the world on this. I totally agree with you on that.
You are absolutely right, and this is, I think, a very, very valid question. The challenge is not just China. The challenge also is that we have had an established security paradigm in the world for the last 50 years, which has been US-centric. In fact, if you look at the free world, the entire security paradigm has been built around the US, NATO plus US. In Asia, continental Asia, whether it's the Middle East or the East Asia, US. US has been guaranteeing the security of China, Taiwan, South Korea, Philippines, Australia, and so on. For a variety of reasons that you know, and especially under the present American administration, US has started looking inwards. And that is a big change. Now, also, number two, while Europe has a security architecture, Asia does not have a security architecture, continental Asia or Indo-Pacific region. And you are spot on that it's not possible to have a meaningful dialogue with China one-on-one. ASEAN region has seen that. The Southeast Asian region has seen that. So yes, there are challenges. To your very valid question, I do not have an answer that I can say definitively. I'll again come to that my earnest hope is at this juncture for like-minded countries to at least come together. Now, let me bring in another pointer. You remember that a few days ago, the G7 Foreign Ministers Summit had happened. Ministers meeting had happened, the G7 meeting. Pompeo, the Secretary of State, wanted to describe coronavirus as Chinese virus. And the joint statement could not be issued because European powers, especially France, Germany, and Italy, were not even ready to call it China virus. If that is the case, how do you handle it? So again, the least in my view that can be done is because the UN Security Council has been rendered non-functional. WHO is doing the Chinese bidding. The background of the DG of WHO is public knowledge. So at least the world should come together, like-minded countries should come together on a common platform through a teleconference and agree on a joint statement and at least issue a joint statement saying, Mr. China, sir, XYZ are the questions. Can we ask for some meaningful answers? At least that's the first step, but I don't know when will that happen.
Is there also an opportunity, longer run for India now to push and become part of that Security Council, right? For years and years, we've been trying to get on, right? And now, is there some opportunity even in this crisis, longer run, for us to renew and say, look, at least we're a responsible country, maybe a messy democracy, but still a democracy and still doing...
Not a messy democracy, we are a vibrant, boisterous democracy, as I like to say. But, we have, if one country has the credentials, I'm very convinced, not just as a very proud Indian, but I'm very convinced that India has the right credentials. But the question is, having the credentials is not good enough. The UN Security Council is the club of haves, and why will they are very wary. They don't want to open up. Now, let me take the discussion a little forward. Tell me today, in today's times, what United Kingdom have to be a permanent member of the UN Security Council? In 1945 they had, not today. So there are realistic considerations. I think it's not going. I hope it happens tomorrow, but it's unlikely to happen in a hurry. We have to continue this effort. It will take time, but hopefully we will prevail eventually.
This is Vipin. May I ask another question or somebody else in the queue?
Yes, sure. Last question, Vipinji.
Okay. Yeah. So just wanted to ask Vishnu, is India doing enough to capitalize economically on this current situation? We are so dependent on China for our chemicals, for our medicinal, pharmaceutical industry, electronic industry, and you name it, consumer durables, everything. Is India doing enough, or there's enough opportunity, or this is just a short-term window and we will regret it later?
Well, I bless you for raising this question, because this is the most important. After we have handled the coronavirus, that is confronting the nation. Our challenge, Vipin, is that our manufacturing base is very narrow. 16 to 17% of our GDP comes from the manufacturing or industrial sector, whereas we need to at least enhance it to 26, 27.
Right.
Now, for that, we need to open up. For that, we need we talk about being a part of the international value chain, supply chain. How can we be a part of international supply chain if we cannot meet our own requirements? So, and we are a very big market. We are going to grow. Our demand is going to grow rapidly. So the first thing is to expand our own manufacturing base, for which we need to take a slew of measures. I mean, which you very well know: labor reforms, land reforms. We need to further dismantle the hold of the bureaucrats like me, and we need to do. Not going to. I'm hoping that once we emerge from this crisis, the government may say that, look, we need to do that. That gives an opening to the government. But we are well placed. We are well poised. At least for the last 20 years, I've been hearing, reading, saying publicly that we are on the takeoff stage. I hope we can take off, but that we need serious reforms, and we need to we have improved from 144 in the ease of doing business to 63. Hats off, and this has happened in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
But what we need to also appreciate is that we are at 63. 62 countries are ahead of us.
Yeah.
So
the work is cut out for us.
Yeah.
So I want to carry on the conversation. India-US relations have transformed beyond imagination. From being estranged democracies to engaged friends. What led to the 180 degrees turn? During Trump's visit to February, New Delhi agreed to source the MH-60 and AH-64 Apache helicopters worth $3 million. So please comment on the relations.
Thank you, Archana, for asking this. The magic word is the E word, and that is economy, economy, economy. I was posted in New York, in the US, when Clinton was campaigning, and there was the Democrats used to wear a badge saying, if many of you will recall, it is the economy, stupid. everything hinges on economy. What has led to the change is that finally we got out of the Hindu growth rate of 4% and became a faster growing economy. So today that you are a $2.7, $2.8 trillion economy, you will be a $5 trillion economy hopefully by the mid 20s and a $10 trillion economy by the mid 30s is what I like to put it as the pull factor and the push factor. So the economy is the pull factor for India-US relations. I mean, certainly the democratic credentials, the Indian diaspora, our youth dividend, there are a lot of factors. So this is one set of the factors. And in the pull factor also comes in that in all the studies that have been done, India and US's interests do not clash under practically any circumstance. So there is a convergence. And then there's a push factor in that there is a country that is emerging very fast. And that, let me name it. I mean, I'm no longer in the saddle. So, China is busy crafting a China-centric world order, where the place that China wants to attribute to a number of countries, including India, is at variance with the place that we see for ourselves. That China wants to replace US as the net security provider. So there is that push factor also. So it is the pull factor and the push factor which have combined to put this relationship together. And by the way, we have something like 60 dialogue mechanisms with the US. Anything under the sun is being discussed. And you would have seen media reports that yesterday, I think, Dr. Jaishankar, our External Affairs Minister, and Secretary Pompeo had a very good conversation. It's a relationship which literally has been transformed from what it was, and it all started, last comment here, in March 2000, when we were under nuclear sanctions and President Clinton visited India along with Chelsea. That was March 2000. Came for 5 days, and the rest, as they say, is history.
That's true. Anybody has any questions regarding Indo-US relations or anything? Anybody?
I think my only comment was that you said, we came on ease of doing business 144 to 63, but on the ground there are still a lot of things to do. And having started a startup in 2 years back, I think still there is a lot of government regulations which are there, which we need to do and maybe enhance further. Maybe 63 it is, but they haven't eased on the ground.
Rakesh, I agree with you only 199%. I mean, normally I don't agree more than 5% with anybody. I agree with you 199%. And Lee Kuan Yew, who I have nothing but great admiration for the late Lee Kuan Yew. He had come to India in the mid, I think, around 2006 or something. And I could be off by a year or two on the date. He was speaking in Delhi, and he was upfront in saying that the Indian bureaucrat is a regulator, not a facilitator. So that is the whole challenge, the mindset. So there is that consideration, and we need to change.
Just coming back, if I may, to the US-India question, and since you're not in the Foreign Service anymore, and presumably can speak relatively openly, if you look back at your entire career, and you've seen Democratic administrations, you've seen Republican administrations, which would you sort of opt for if we had, let's say, I mean, relations between India and the US, are they better, overall sense, under a Democratic administration or under a Republican? What's your view?
Archana and Rakesh, I will certainly answer that question, but I think we should have Ranjan conduct a session.
Oh, no.
I love his thought process. And well, Ranjan, it is a fact that there is a cross-party consensus across the political spectrum in both countries, US and India, for the reasons that I enumerated, to engage with each other. Having said that, I think the Republicans have been more forthcoming of late. Although if you see, the normalization process started under Clinton. Then Bush came. Now the kind of support that Bush extended to India, I have not seen in my adult career any major power doing for any country. And the heavy lifting that he did to get us out of the nuclear cold is amazing. When we got in a nuclear supply group's waiver in September 2008. So the Republicans in some ways have been more practical because they are not encumbered by certain philosophical burdens that the Democrats are. But in the last 20 years, actually the relationship has gone, as I could not have imagined when I was posted in Tokyo in March 2000 when Clinton visited and the world was sanctioning us that we will see a day like today or day like February 24th of February when a gentleman like Mr. Trump will fly across the Atlantic with his family, which he has never done to any other country, and spend 36 hours. I mean, it's amazing.
And he's already looking forward to it next time.
Sorry, just one follow-up.
He said, Alta Vista, I'll be back.
Yeah, that's what he's already looking forward. Last question, Ranjan, and we move forward.
Yeah, sure. Just while I understand the practicalities and the lack of ideology and the things you mentioned about the Republicans, there are global issues like climate change, for example, where clearly under the present administration we would be at loggerheads with them, as is most of the rest of the world, right? I mean, the Republicans are not for basic things like even accepting that climate change is a man-made. I mean, at least under Trump, right? And the way he's unleashed the oil companies and energy, basically said no holds barred and disbanded conservation efforts, right? So on those kind of global issues, I would say we don't have anything in common with them.
Well, hats off to President Trump. He has come up with solutions which no living person could think of in his world. When somebody told him that, the world is getting warmer, so he said, what's the problem? Switch on the AC. Brilliant, absolutely, isn't it? That was on a lighter note, but, one thing that is very important for India's foreign policy is strategic autonomy of decision making.
Right.
We are a very large country. We cannot be tied to the coattails of anybody. So the mantra of India's external or international relations or foreign policy is partnerships, yes, alliances, no. We are only aligned to our national interests as any other country is, and there's nothing wrong with that. So we will take whatever decision we have to take in national interest. Last thing is that with nobody living or in any relationship, you cannot have 100% convergence. If you can tell me any relationship, personal or professional, where you have 100% convergence, I'll doff my hat to you. So yes, I mean, where we agree, it's fine. The areas of disagreement are very few, but yes, we have.
So on that, I take us to another relationship, a very close neighboring country. Are you on the line?
I'm with you.
Okay. Pakistani army is the only one which has a country. Pakistan is a terror state. So why haven't we still succeeded in labeling Pakistan a terror state? Your views?
Yeah. It is generally believed that
Sorry, but I know you have very strong views, so we would like to hear all of them. Please.
Well, I'm going to happily articulate all my strong views. Don't you worry about that. it is generally said that every country has an army, but it's a fact that Pakistani army is the only army which has a country at its disposal, and they are using it to the hilt. It's an unfortunate bit that in the 70 years history, the Pakistani military has been the de facto and the de jure power for half of the time, and other half of the time they have been de facto power. So whatever be the form of the government, Pakistani army is the final arbiter of decisions or relations with India, China, Saudi Arabia, USA. The nuclear button are all controlled by the Pakistani army. So that is a fact. Now, why have we not been able to have Pakistan labeled as a terror state? I mean, whereas the world knows, and nobody better than the US, which are losing its boys and girls in Afghanistan because Pakistan is playing both sides. The challenge is twofold. One, we have also not been consistent hitherto. If you look at our own track record, we are upset, angry for various reasons, and then we make a grand gesture. Yeah, with hindsight. So there has been a bit of an iffy approach on our part. Secondly, let's also face it that Pakistan is the 5th largest country on the planet in terms of population. 230 million people. It's a nuclear weapon state. It's a state which deals with a gun on its own temple. Do this or I'll blow my brains out. I'm exaggerating to trying to make a point, but that's the whole challenge. Now, the challenge goes to the extent that US, as President Trump has said, US has given $33 billion at least in the last 20 years since 2001 to Pakistan to behave. And what has Pakistan done? So we have a rogue state on our borders, unfortunately, where the jihadis rule the roost. The Pakistani army rules the roost, and we have a big challenge. So, and this challenge is not going to go away in a hurry. It will ebb and flow. But unfortunately, that's the nature of the beast that we have, that we will, and they are being supported to the hilt by China. Because China is using Pakistan as a cat's paw to try to keep India off balance. And that unholy alliance, I think, will continue for a while.
Anybody, any questions? Okay, so we continue. Now, this is away from the politics. It is something which is very passionate to Vishnuji, and I want to tell everybody about it because not many of us know about this. During our conversation the other day, you shared that you, along with more leaders from civil services, are part of Samkalp, a 30 years old NGO helping young graduates prepare for civil services exams, interviews, and group discussions. And that is such a noble thought. And I'm sure it's a great effort, and I know you're very passionate about it. So please elaborate about Samkalp and how can it benefit our kids as well.
I really appreciate your bringing up that the Sankalp factor. Any friend who is listening to the conversation could just Google search it. It's Sankalp, SAMKALP, Samkalp. And in 1990, I think some of the senior civil servants, IAS, IPS, IFS, academics, some others, they got together and said, look, let's give something back to the society. And they have constituted this NGO which does completely pro bono work. The best part is nobody who is involved with that gets a penny. In fact, they contribute. And they charge, let me deliver a pleasant surprise to my friends. The civil service academies charge anything between 50,000 to a lakh of rupees to just prepare youngsters for taking the interviews, and Sankalp charges 800 rupees. 800 rupees. That too to cover the meals, etc., because they even provide lunch and breakfast and so on. And civil servants, retired and serving, they volunteer their time along with academics, members from the corporate world, to prepare the youngsters. Now, what I was mentioning to Archana ji was that in World Spa, we have so much of experience from people from all walks of life at the senior most positions. Perhaps we can start voluntarily help doing mock interviews for youngsters, not just for civil services, but who want to appear for interviews with the corporate world for anything. And we can try to give back something to the society. It has for me been a matter of great joy to be associated with this wonderful organization, to see youngsters enthusiastic about the civil services, and try to share something little that one knows. Thank you.
That's quite a fantastic idea, and with all the talent that is here in World Spa in our kids, I think we could get together and form a group, and it'll really benefit everybody. And where do we get? I mean, how many people actually get lucky having people like you in the society? Vishnuji.
And while on this subject now, can I digress a little with your?
Sure.
You know, I wanted to share a thought with all of you. You know, most of us have lived abroad. We have been at the station of life that we occupy. We have been living in the best of areas, society. And you will agree that a society like the World Spa is very rare. I mean, hats off genuinely to the BOM for doing what they are doing. But our staff, I can, in all honesty, I have not seen such a dedicated staff. As even in the times of adversity, to be on the station, to be on the guard, to do what they are doing. So just a thought that I wanted to leave with fellow Spartans is that, can we, as a token of our gratitude to say thank you, can we contribute a small amount, maybe equivalent to just 2 cups of tea and a brownie, which is 500 rupees that we'll spend without thinking, and leave that money with the BOM, so that while this crisis goes on, at least, something we can, reach out, the BOM can reach out to the staff and say thank you, maybe fruit, maybe whatever. And it should be certainly voluntary. I'll send out a group mail after that, but also talk to BOM. This is just a thought, because we need to tell our staff that, we care, that we are very grateful. We sleep so peacefully and happily because of our staff. So I just wanted to add that to it.
I think that's a wonderful thought. And I'm sure, it's such a small amount, and it's a very, very beautiful gesture that will happen for the staff. And I'm sure all of us will agree with it. So another question, Vishnuji. No, this time it's not a question. I'm now wrapping up the questions. I'm going to ask you something else. Your articles are published with Hindustan Times, The Asian Age, Korean Times, ETV Bharat, and The Quint, amongst other media outlets. And I know you have a great sense of humor, because I've also been reading your tweets, and I want to share some of them with everybody. One of them was, never in my whole life would I imagine my hands would consume more alcohol than my mouth. Actually, what a situation to be in for all of us. And the other one was, I had dinner with my wife, now holding scotch. So which scotch would you generally hold nowadays at home? The regular scotch or the Scotch Brite? I'm asking you.
Well, I'll hold Scotch Brite. One hand I'll Scotch and the other hand Scotch Brite. So yes.
You can hold both, right? One hand each.
Why is Archana saying either or? We can do both.
Actually.
The question is for you, Archana. What does Anurag hold these days? That's really important.
So one after the other. Of course, once you hold the Scotch Brite, you deserve a Scotch, right? And also, I want to bring it to the attention of all around here that he, there was this chat session with him in Korea, and he said that Indian wives are the best. And I'm sure all men resonate the same thought here. And what advice would you give to all the gentlemen here?
If I said that, I must be hallucinating. If I said that, or maybe was a little tipsy. Did I say that in my chat?
Yes, you did.
Sir, you are treading.
I don't know about wives because I have only one. I can say that about the ladies that they are the best in the world. But my wife, let me talk of my wife. She is the most considerate, most giving, most generous, etc., etc. And let me contextualize it. We were posted in Tokyo in 1998 when the Asian financial crisis happened. And guess which country emerged the first? South Korea. And the reason South Korea emerged the first was that South Korean women lined up for hours in front of banks donating their jewelry, gold, in national interest. And it was amazing. And that's when my love affair with South Korea began. Now, somebody asked my wife, what will you do under the circumstances? And I said that she is very generous, giving, considerate. I said, oh, South Korean wives give only the gold, I'll give away my husband. So, jewelry is not important, husband is important. So she is willing to give away the husband even. What can be more generous, giving, considerate, open, kind of liberal than my wife? So, I mean, I'm very fortunate.
So now we are about to wrap up, and I want to invite more questions from everybody. Anybody who wants to ask questions?
Sir, one question. This is Vinesh. One thing
Yes,
from my
Vinesh.
side. In this whole COVID situation that is going on, do you see the world behaving as one right now, or every country is doing something of their own, and there's no, common global fight towards it? What's your view from a, international affairs standpoint?
Answer is yes and no. In some cases, we have to come together because the best practices have to be shared. The scientific knowledge has to be shared. If we are doing research, R&D, we can share that. Because the big challenge is to come up with a vaccine or at least a medicine, and experiments are being done, as you know that. So yes, there is collaboration and amongst various countries to exchange notes, to keep each other informed. So to that extent, yes. But it's also a crisis of the proportions that mankind has rarely seen. So everybody will first take care of their own needs, of course, and then attend to the others. Because at the moment, people are grappling. Countries in Europe and the US, etc. Look at the numbers; they are frightening. Yeah. Every day, 500 to 1,000 people in peace times is unheard of.
Thank you.
Anything else, anybody?
I think we still have 4 minutes, so we can cover a couple of questions.
So I can ask you one more question. I mean, our foreign policy is changing, and we already discussed China, America. So how do you see our foreign policy 10-15 years down the road? How do you think it's going to pan out for India, and where is India going to be?
It will all hinge on 2 or 3 factors, internal and external factors. What do we need? Let's turn this, look at it slightly differently. Internally, we need 2 or 3 things. We need stable governments. I dread to think of a situation we are back to coalition governments. And so I really hope that we have, whichever government comes to power, we have majority governments. I really hope that we do not see civil strife, because that is something that can cause difficulties. And also the economy. Everything hinges, I can say that again, the rest is a matter of detail, because so long as the economy does well, our defense will do well, our security will do well, our science will do well, our R&D will do well. So that is one. And on the external front, we need peace times, because unfortunately, the menace of terrorism we will have to deal with, but I hope that it does not degenerate into something else. There are these imponderables that one has to point out. But that said, I am quite hopeful that as we become more stronger economically, we will be able to forge better partnerships We will be able to play a more active role in the Indo-Pacific region. We have been a net security provider in any case. So we have a brand equity which is unparalleled. We have a cultural might which is unparalleled. And these are very good times for India. But we need to stay the course, because even when our economy is a $10 trillion economy by mid-30s, our per capita income will be still will be around $7,000. So even then, and then there is this huge disparity. So while there are huge challenges, there are huge opportunities. We also have challenges on the educational side, on putting our people, youngsters to work. So it's a mixed bag, but I've never been more bullish on India.
That's awesome. And with that, we want to end the session now. Thank you everyone for taking time out to attend the session, and thank you Vishnu ji for giving us your valuable time.
And thank you Archana and Rakesh for moderating it, for putting this together. Hats off to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Time for the music hour,
Thank
everybody.
you, everybody.
Over to
We had-
Devang, Ranjit and Atul for the music hour. And I want to tell, sorry, Rakesh.
Yeah, we had I think 65 participants at a peak, and I think this was very involved. And Ranjan, thank you so much for all your insights as well. Apart from Vishnu ji, obviously, I think it was amazing. Yeah, sorry, Archana, go ahead.
So no, I was just informing everybody. Tomorrow we are going to be in conversation with a young achiever, Shaili Chopra. She's a successful business journalist and the founder of She the People TV. So and she it's a great platform to empower women.
Yeah, one
And
more
good
one
evening
more thing
again.
about her was that she was live covering the Taj
The
attack.
Taj.
She was there
Wow.
for 60 hours.
Wow.
Oh.
So
Okay.
thank you everybody. This is your
Thank
neighbor
you.
and host Archana Malhotra. Good evening and bye-bye.